Hello everybody, I hope all of you are fine, even if we are living in difficult and complex circumstances. Okay, for the subject of this week about economic inequality, I would like to share with you this World Inequality Report 2018, which will be our text for this subject. So please study it during this week, and hopefully when we'll return to class we'll talk about it. This report um, it's from the World Inequality Lab, which is a lab from the Paris School of Economy. One of the team of the research team of the leaders are, as you can see here, Thomas Piketty, which is the author that you have a reading for this week. Okay, so please study carefully this report. Here we can see what is the aim of the World Inequality Report 2018. The World Inequality Report 2018 relies on a cutting-edge methodology to measure income and wealth inequality in a systematic and transparent manner. By developing this report, the World Inequality Lab seeks to fill a democratic gap and to equip various actors of society with the necessary facts to engage in informed public debates on inequality. What are our new findings on global income inequality? We show that income inequality has increased in nearly all world regions in recent decades, but at different speeds. The fact that inequality levels are so different among countries, even when countries share similar levels of development, highlights the important roles that national policies and institutions play in shaping inequality. So here in figure E1 we can see the top 10% national income share across the world. And we see that Europe has 37%, then we have China, Russia, US, Canada, Sub-Saharan Africa, Brazil, India, and then Middle East, which has the highest highest level of income inequality. I mean, the lowest level we find it in Europe and the highest in the Middle East. Here we have other graph about the top 10% income shares across the world, where we can see that there is a trend in rising inequality almost everywhere, but at different speeds. We have India, which has a very important degree of inequality, but also US, Canada, Russia, China, even Europe. So the trend is towards increasing economic inequality. How has inequality evolved in recent decades among global citizens? We provide the first estimates of how the growth in global income since 1980 has been distributed across the totality of the world population. The global top 1% earners has captured twice as much of that growth as the 50% poorest individuals. The bottom 50% has nevertheless enjoyed important growth rates. The global middle class, which contains all of the poorest 90% income groups in the EU and the United States, has been squeezed. Here we have more graphs about the top 1% versus the bottom 50% national income shares in the US and Western Europe. So we can see that the top 1% has increased extraordinarily, but the bottom 50% has decreased. That means that income inequality has increased and increased since we can see here in the 90s, 1995, in an extraordinary way. Much more than in Western Europe. But even if the trend is also to a rise of the top 1% and a decrease of the bottom 50%, the degree of inequality has not reached the extraordinary level of the US, even if the inequality also increased in the European Union. Here we have the elephant curve of global inequality and growth from 1980 to 2016, and we see again that the top 1% is capturing more and more of the total growth. Here we have the rise of the global top 1% versus the stagnation of the global bottom 50%. So now we're talking in terms of the whole world, of the global society. So we find that the global top 1% has increased and increased from in 1980 around the 16-17% of the share of global income to more than 20%. However, the global bottom 50% stays between the 7-8% to the 9% of the global income. So, the report poses the questions of why does the evolution of private and public capital ownership matter for inequality, and the explanation of the report is that the economic inequality is largely driven by the unequal ownership of capital, which can be either privately or public owned. We show that since 1980, very large transfers of public to private wealth occur in nearly all countries, whether rich or emerging. While national wealth has substantially increased, public wealth is now negative or close to zero in rich countries. Arguably, this limits the ability of governments to tackle inequality. Certainly, it has important implications for wealth inequality among individuals. So here we find in figure E6 the rise of private capital and the fall of public capital in rich countries. So there is a tendency to the rise of the private capital in parallel to the fall of public capital in the richest countries, since the 70s, where, as you remember, are the years when the neoliberal paradigm was launched and the globalization, understood as neoliberal globalization, began. Here we find figure E7, the decline of public capital since the 1970s. From the 70% of the value of net public wealth to around the 30% in China. And then in France and in the Western countries, from the 20 to the 30 to less than 6-7%. So what are our new findings on global wealth inequality? The combination of large privatizations and increasing income inequality within countries has fueled the rise of wealth inequality among individuals. In Russia and the United States, the rise in wealth inequality has been extreme, whereas in Europe it has been more moderate. Wealth inequality has not yet returned to its extremely high early 20th century level in rich countries. So here we have in the first decades of the 20th century, the degree of wealth inequality was very big. So here we find the top 1% wealth share across the world. So we see in the first decades of the 20th century the degree of personal wealth inequality was extremely high in all countries, in China, France, Russia, UK, and US. And since then, we find a progressive declining in the personal wealth inequality until the 80s and 90s, where there is a new rise, a new increase of this personal wealth inequality in almost all the countries shown in the graph. So what is the future of global inequality and how should it be tackled? We project income and wealth inequality up to 2050 under different scenarios. In a future, says the report, in which business as usual continues, global inequality will further increase. Alternatively, if in the coming decades all countries follow the moderate inequality trajectory of Europe over the past decades, global income inequality can be reduced, in which case there can also be substantial progress in eradicating global poverty. So here we see in the figure their projections according to the different politics. So, well, the reports say that rising global income inequality is not inevitable in the future if countries assume those kind of politics trying to struggle against inequality and not reducing their policies to the business as usual. Global income inequality will also increase under a business as usual scenario, even with optimistic growth assumption in emerging countries. But we can repeat that this is not inevitable, however. Because as the figure E11 shows, inequality has substantial impacts on global poverty. It's a factory of poverty, inequality of increasing poverty, as we can see on this graph. So, tackling global income and wealth inequality requires important shifts in national and global tax policies, educational policies, corporate governance, and wage setting policies need to be reassessed in many countries. Data transparency is also key. So those are the conclusions of this world report, and I hope all you can access and read it and prepare for the exam. So thank you very much for listening to me, and I'll try to upload more videos like that in order to keep the online learning until we can finally return to class. Thank you.